Hey cultivators, thank you so much for tuning into today's video. I'm super excited to bring the author of Why Always Wins. It's a really fantastic book that I read in under an hour. If you are looking to advance your career, you want to become a better leader, you want to become a better employee, this is really an excellent book that you need to pick up. And I'm really excited to have Stephen share all about his philosophy and why he wrote the book. But just a quick introduction of the book. And Stephen, please correct me if I didn't get this right, but this is my synopsis. And I am not like an expert at writing synopses. So basically, the way that I saw the book is it is a must read for anybody that is in corporate or works for an organization. I love, by the way, that it's a comic style. It was really super fun to read. And there's also like workbooks that go into anything that is actionable, which I think is very important because we can learn at a high level. But if we're not implementing the things, then it just becomes knowledge instead of wisdom. But the book actually starts off with a protagonist named Max, and he is actually thinking about quitting his job or like being really unhappy and thinking about exiting. But through the whole journey and the story, he actually starts to build awareness and learns these development and communication tools so that he can step into becoming a better leader. And by the end of the book, he actually has formed better relationships. He's super happy and thriving in his position and in his role. So I just really loved it because it hits on so many things that we don't necessarily learn. And we have a lot of conflict in the workplace oftentimes because there's so many different personalities. But this really brought in so many actionable insights and tips and tools so that anybody really can step into becoming a better leader. So I hope that was a good synopsis.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I absolutely loved reading it. And so, Stephen, I'd love if you can introduce yourself to the audience and just share a little bit more about who you are, aside from the
Awesome. Thank you.
author.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are really kind words. So yeah, my name is Stephen Gay. I'm originally from Canada, but I live in the Bay Area. I'm a UX leader, which is a user experience design leader. I've worked for a bunch of companies in the Valley, but currently I work at Google. I'm also working towards being a certified coach. And so I have a real passion about collaboration and communication. And yeah, that's why this topic's really important to me.
I love it. And I actually have a certification in coaching. And as I was reading this, I was like, oh, he has so many coaching principles. So that makes complete sense. But I wanted to ask, like, what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, no, thank you. So probably maybe about 10, 15 years ago in my career, I really struggled with communication and collaboration. And it was a real turning point in my career when, a mentor took me aside and really helped me refocus on what's important in the business world. And one of those key values was working better with people through better communication and collaboration practices. So for me, I went on this path of learning, reading books, taking workshops. So I received that gift myself. And so later on, when I became a manager and a people leader, I noticed a similar pattern with people I was hiring and working with. And I said, there might be a better way to kind of provide a good foundation for these skills. And that's when Why Always Wins was sort of born. I'm also, because I'm a designer, I really believe in the art of storytelling. So, the content of the book married with like a graphic design format kind of just naturally came together. And that's how it came to be.
I have to say, it was so fun to read. And I love that you had the gift and now you're giving that gift to others because it really is a career changer when you can improve. I want to share, like, I took a poll recently for my audience and I asked them, like, what they're experiencing the most in the workplace. And so many of them had said burnout and just being really unhappy, unfulfilled. And I think a large part of that stems from just, again, the conflicts in the workplace and not really feeling like we have the power to improve or not knowing how to improve. So the fact that you're a UX designer and really taking that zone of genius of making it like illustrative and fun to read and engaging and informative at the same time, I think is so empowering. Can I ask, Stephen, going back to like, I guess, awareness, you talk in the book about like social awareness versus team awareness versus self-awareness. I'd love if you can just describe that to the audience and how they can take that to benefit wherever they are in their careers right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you talked a little bit about just a second ago about burnout, and I think that is actually very related to these three types of awareness. So self-awareness is really understanding how you are thinking and feeling, and that's at the core, right? A good example is if maybe I skip breakfast and I'm feeling a little bit, hangry, like that can cause problems in the workforce, right? So how do you have self-awareness of what's going on with you can affect how you interact with others. Team awareness is then you having an understanding of how you are currently working with other people's, and that could be a team of two, you and another person, or it could be a larger team. And again, I think burnout's very related to that. I think, especially in the context of working from home, like there's some sort of environment between you and that team member, the person you're interacting with, and having an awareness of that is key. Social awareness is the bigger sphere that surrounds team and self. And that's really about your relationship to the larger organization, the world, or any other larger context. And I think, especially today when we're all working from home and in the world of COVID, like social awareness is key, right? And so you're seeing these three layers, and if you have an understanding of each layer, then you can make better decisions on how you interact and collaborate with people you work with.
I like that. And I know prior to jumping on, you mentioned that you've been working from home for about a year. And I know right now everybody's questioning, like, what does the future of work look like? And how do we have better communication and relationships when we're virtually connected? Just really quick, I'm curious if you have any tips or considerations on how to bring this into the digital world, because a lot of communication typically is like body language, and you get a different sense of working with people face to face, but how can we bring this into the everyday of our new norm?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think in the context of the physical work environment, you're right. We do have body language. We have more opportunities for spontaneity, to have these hallway conversations, to meet someone in the kitchen and grab a coffee together. Working from home eliminates a lot of that. And so I think, we need to lean in, especially today, into the different technologies. So chat, video chat, email, and then saying like, hey, if I had a meeting with someone in this larger group, maybe you read something, or you maybe saw an expression on someone's face, or they weren't talking in the meeting. You can't run into the kitchen anymore. So send them a ping, send them a chat, ask them for real-time feedback. You almost have to do extra work in this context, but one of the core principles of the book is like lead with inquiry. So ask and try to pick up on those cues, even if it is digital today.
Yeah, I like the lead with inquiry, because that really does, and it makes sense why the title of the book is Why Always Wins. Just by asking why and having these discussions and questions can unravel a lot. I actually had a question as I was reading through the book that I was curious about, because in the book, I really love that you talked about the ladder of inference, and I would love for you to just explain that to our audience, and if possible, we can put a graphic up in post-production. But a lot of us jump to interpretations and conclusions, so I would love if you can explain what the ladder of inference is and that inquiry, so that people can stop avoiding these, I guess, what I would call miscommunications, or I guess just overall like misunderstandings.
Yeah, so the ladder of inference is really a framework. It helps describe how a person goes from data and then moves through, and this happens in milliseconds, to some form of action. And in this case, the ladder describes the base layer as some sort of data. That's information we're receiving from our coworkers, from our boss, and then we typically apply filters to that data. The information you want to hear or don't want to hear. And then based on that, you quickly make assumptions, and then you jump to a conclusion, then a belief, and then an action. And because this happens so quickly, for us as sort of being self-aware, the important thing is to like try to slow that down, and then really systematically think like, what am I actually hearing? What's actually happening in the room? What do I believe is happening, or what assumptions are I making? And if you don't really know, or you don't have a high confidence, that's when you lead with inquiry.
Mm.
In the book there's some good examples, but I think we do it all the time. We typically we want to hear something that already strengthens our belief, and that's why we take action. So if you're sitting in a meeting and someone's talking and explaining you something, and your mind is already racing with a response, it's probably a good indicator that you've jumped up the ladder really quickly because you're taking action to immediately respond versus waiting and processing what that person is saying. And obviously, different relationships work differently. If you really have a great flow with a team, you can make those assumptions quickly, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I feel like a lot of people, I know in the book, like we talk a lot about just being self-aware and taking the time to process and reflect. And I know like one of the things is like anytime you feel triggered, like take some time and reflect upon that and really get to the core beliefs of or the core thoughts of why you felt that way. But I'm curious because a lot of like the ladder of inference, it seems like and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it can come from reflecting after the fact, like in hindsight, like, this happened this afternoon and now I'm responding to it. But how do we utilize this in the moment? Like you're in a meeting and something like just triggers you right off the bat. Is it something that you bring up immediately, or is it something that you kind of digest first and then bring up to your subordinate or your coworker later?
Yeah, I actually really love that question because you actually bring up a really interesting thought. We live in a fast-paced world, so we're always making decisions. In fact, there's a lot of pressure in organizations to make decisions even faster.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of pressures to make thoughtful decisions, which I think is key. So you're right. If you do quickly make a statement or an action in a meeting because maybe you're rushing through it, it's absolutely okay to come back and revisit that and be like, you know what? I thought that person meant this, but maybe they didn't mean that. That's not a problem. Reach out in a virtual world, reach out and ask that person, send them a ping, send them a chat, and get that information quickly. In the context of the meeting, again, because sometimes this happens so quickly, or if you're being more thoughtful, is like kind of jump in, like what conclusion am I going to? So ask yourself those words in your head. I think that helps me personally. What am I missing? Is kind of what I always ask myself. And what do I need to ask to fill in that gap? And that in a big meeting, just bouncing questions back and forth that's the beauty of collaboration.
Yeah, I think it all boils down to like almost over communicating instead of writing on assumptions. Or I think a lot of people like they're afraid to speak up or voice their opinions, or they don't want to be like that person that raises their hand again. But it's sometimes better to just clear it all out versus assuming, which we all heard like you make an ass out of you and me whenever you assume, which is the case for a lot of the times.
Yeah. I'm early on my coaching certification, but as coaches, we are taught to ask powerful questions.
Yeah.
And I think, when you look at the ladder, each rung of the ladder, there's an opportunity to ask a powerful question. And so, if a person's having trouble asking in a meeting, probably assume everyone else is struggling with the same thing. So yeah, think through and think about what is this person saying who's saying here, what assumptions are they making? What do they believe? Yeah. And if it's different than what you do, raise that as a question, and lead with inquiry. Hey, I'm hearing you're saying this. Is that what you mean? Because I'm considering this other alternative. That's one of the most powerful tools to open up the conversation. And that leads to, I think, innovation and better problem solving.
Absolutely. And I love that the whole storyline is like centered around this person, Max, who just asked one of the most difficult coworkers. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst coworker or employee. But he is able to overcome it by just asking and having them open up. So I guess because a large part of this is self-awareness. And if you are working with different personalities that are hard to get along with, and maybe they don't have as much self-awareness, I'm curious, like, what you can do. I mean, I know at the end of the day, we can only control what we do, but what would your advice be in those situations?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and you're spot on. Like you only have control of your own actions and the way you process. Um, so in the book, there's a couple things that come to mind. It's a technique that can use in more of a larger setting where there's multiple people in the room. So if someone maybe you're having an impasse, there's a problem sort of communicating back and forth. I see this happen all the time where two opinions come up and then there's no resolution. In the book, I describe a technique called the boomerang, which is then bringing other people into the conversation to expand that. One of the things with a boomerang is you need to live with what comes back, because maybe the perspective that comes back is aligned with the other person, but at least you've expanded the conversation. So that's a good tool to utilize when you're dealing with an impasse with an individual. I talk a little bit in the book around escalation, an escalation framework on when dealing with a difficult person. How do you know to continue ladder it up? Like, you don't just run to the person's boss and complain. That's probably not going to get you anywhere. But at the core of that, it's leading with inquiry, trying to get to the root of what a person cares about. And it goes right back to the ladder of inference, right? Like if you talk to the person, understand that their core needs or what they want is very much aligned with you, usually you can get to some sort of resolution. If you find out the needs are something that's maybe misaligned, then how do you work on rectifying that? And that comes through conversation. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but I think, there's no one magic solution for that situation other than time and lots of inquiry.
Yeah, no, that absolutely answered it. And I think that a lot of people, like they almost feel like you can't change somebody, or like, I just need to exit this organization and find a new opportunity. But I think you as a coach know that that's just like a Band-Aid fix, right? Because if we're not solving the core problem, the root cause, which is typically in this case, like being able to have those difficult conversations and building that patience and inquiry to work and resolve through anything, then we're just going to we're going to be bound to find ourselves in that same situation again and again. So I love that you have these practical tools where people can start to practice them and start to see these shifts that happen, all because we're just being patient and leading with curiosity and trying to I love how in the book you also talk about like mirroring another person and kind of speaking to like match their tone and match their like speed even in the way that they speak. So can you talk a little bit more about that and why that's so important?
Yeah, mirroring is a good technique. And I'll say too, is like a lot of these things that we talk about in the book, it's really, think of it as a toolkit. They're things a person can, they're best practices, but they're also things a person can leverage and use in the right moment. Mirroring is one of those techniques where you're really, and it's not just being a parrot, you're not just repeating back what you heard, but it's bringing in the information when someone's saying it to you, processing that data, and then summarizing it and sending it back. And the benefit of that is it helps assume you haven't filtered the data inaccurately and you haven't made an assumption when you process it back. So it's a really effective tool. And it's not just a tool that's valuable for the person who's giving you the information. It's actually, for me, it's super valuable because I retain the information much better when I'm processing it and then sending it back. And there's an added byproduct. By processing and sending it back, then you have an opportunity to continue to process and then come up with the next question or the next best way to kind of further the conversation. And I'm not saying like a conversation it's a two-way street. And most times people come to the conversation with two different agendas on what they both want out of the conversation. This is a great way to get alignment and then potentially use inquiry to then move your conversation forward while you're supporting their conversation as well.
Yeah, I love that. That actually reminds me of like an NPR interview I heard once about like why so many couples get into arguments. Like they don't use the tool of mirroring. And then they end up like they think they're arguing about one thing, but then they're actually arguing about two different agendas. And that's why like they're on this like railroad track going into two different directions. And it's hard to get back on the same track, but you can always bring that in by just saying like, what I'm hearing you say is blah, 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 blah. Is that accurate? And then making sure, that you two just understand each other.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I use that technique at home all the time, and absolutely at work. And a lot of times I'll say, hey, I'm hearing these two conversations today. I'd like to propose, like, can we put this one aside for 5 minutes and let's focus on this? And that's a really good tool. And even that in itself is an inquiry, because I'm asking to say, hey, I'd like to do this. What do you think? And if it's a big group, it's a boomerang. If it's a small group, it's just a request. So
yeah. I think the buy-in is really key. So I want to just check in because I know the book is like talking about leaders and really developed for leadership type coaching or like management. But in my opinion, and I would love to hear your take on this, in my opinion, like everybody is a leader. So like, even if you don't traditionally hold the title manager or director, like everybody can lead and help resolve any issues themselves. But I do know when I speak with a lot of corporate employees, they feel that because they're like low on the totem pole, or, they are reporting to people higher up, there's that hierarchy. I'm curious, like if somebody does have a leader that isn't necessarily practicing what is in this book about what good leadership should sound like, how would you recommend somebody to take these principles and what you're teaching in this book to try getting a leader on the same page?
Yeah, that is can be challenging for sure. I think, and I preface anything I say too is nothing happens overnight. So it's usually a series of conversations to get some form of alignment. But your question had a lot baked into there, and I would say 100% agree with you that everyone is absolutely a leader in an organization. Everyone has the capability and to lead. I think what it comes down to is where's that permission and authority within the organization. So, people managers have different authority and responsibilities than an individual contributor. And so one of the best things to do with your direct manager is talk about roles and authority, and do a lot of inquiry on what that means for you and the business and the organization. And so an individual contributor might have a lot of authority and the ability to make decisions within the services or products they make within the team, but they might not have an authority to do something more at the strategic or the organizational level. And so you want to have that awareness and understanding. There's definitely a section in the book around roles and responsibilities and authority, because I think it is so key, especially in the workplace, where when this stuff is left undefined, it typically creates problems. And so I think that's probably a really good place to start with your boss from an organizational perspective. From a person-to-person perspective, it's right back getting into like, what's the goals, the motivation, what does this person care about, and how does that align with what you care about? And again, conversation is trying to get alignment around that is kind of key.
It always goes back to the inquiry and the why.
Absolutely.
Why always wins. I love it.
Yeah.
I also want to ask, just personally speaking, what would you consider your management style to be?
Yeah, I'm very service-oriented leader. And again, everyone is different. So everyone needs support in different ways. So again, I always try to tailor my leadership style based on who I'm working with, just like who I'm coaching with. So, I live by the premise that I'm a manager is to help enable everyone on my team to do the best work of their lives.
Yeah.
And by supporting their best work of their lives, they're then creating the best business value for the customer and the organization. And I think that's kind of where the magic happens.
I love that. Because in the book you have a manager. I don't know if she's fictitious or these characters are fictitious, but Kamiko, you're so funny. But Kamiko, like, you know, she did a really great job of facilitating. So I'm actually curious if like she's fictional in your mind, or she's based on like a real leader that you've had.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure Kimiko is, while she's not based on a specific person, over the course of my career, I've met some amazing leaders who are amazing facilitators, and I'm sure Kimiko represents those people. When you find a really strong facilitator, and facilitation is an art form, it requires practice, and it requires training. But again, a great facilitator will read the room, make sure everyone's engaged, but they're also keeping people on track to solving a particular goal. I worked for Intuit before Google, and they have an amazing facilitation practice there. And so, yeah, I think, and a lot of my facilitation skills I learned at that company. So, yeah.
That's great. So I'm curious because I know a lot of people that are watching this are wanting to become better leaders. And so I want to ask if you have any specific tangible advice other than read the book, because it really will enlighten a lot of things. But like, what can you say to like almost if you were counseling or coaching one of your colleagues that wants to continue advancing their career, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start with a real easy answer for that is, when you read the book or you start practicing these skills, I like to frame up all my decisions in sort of two, and this is in the book too, in two bubbles. There's like the what and the how. And I think the what is the products we make, it's the service we provide for our customers, it's the device we put on a store shelf, and that's super important. That drives business and revenues. How on the other side is like how we work with people, how we get that all done. And as a leader, our responsibility is to keep those two in balance. And I think being mindful and being aware of the team and the social dynamics that happen in the team will help drive that balance, and that'll typically create better and happier and more engaged employees. So at a leader, look at that high level. But again, it is all about a practice. So I would say be patient with yourself. You're going to get triggered. You're going to get frustrated. And that's super normal. We're all humans. So, it's about the long journey. So don't get too hung up on the day-to-day. Just have that bigger vision in mind of like a well-balanced team.
Yeah, I really like that. So it's like, this is, and I think you hit on something really important, is that it's just a skill that is being developed and learned. And there's so many scenarios that can come into play. And again, going back to self-awareness, like there could be something that you get triggered by that you normally wouldn't be triggered by, but just based on the circumstance or what we're going through as humans, different things populate. So it's about like this lifelong practice and journey. And that may be the point, is like not necessarily thinking about like an end goal, like I have to be this all the time, or I am this type of person, but that you're working towards it and you're striving and you're aware and conscious of where it is you want to be throughout the journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's well said.
So I'm curious, Stephen, I want to just make sure I don't have any other thoughts or questions. Oh, I have one. So in the book, you talk a lot about, I noticed that you can respond to different situations. And I love that you use the word respond versus react. Can you just talk a little bit about the difference when you have self-awareness as a leader?
Yeah, I don't think we talked about triggers yet in this conversation, but I think that's probably a good starting place to describe react versus respond. So trigger is basically there's some sort of external sort of like stimulant or situation that creates some sort of negative response in you. And typically, based on that, a person maybe won't be able to quickly formulate a way of like sending back out information. And I think when you're triggered, typically you jump into more of a react mode. Like, I just need to get this done, or I just need to do this. Versus a respond mode, it's really around like more of a thoughtful approach. One of the most common things I see is, and I talk about this briefly in the book, is one of the biggest trigger things I think for a lot of people in the industry is time. I need to get this deliverable out.
Yeah.
I need to do this. I have to run to this meeting. And it's like, we're all pressured to like, we all feel the pressure of time. And so the real question is like, what's really important in that moment? Is it launching the product, doing this for a customer? Or does the customer really care about the fact that it's on time? Do they care more about, is it done right? Is it of quality? And so if you help to take the time to think through those trade-offs, then you can respond more thoughtfully and be like, you know what, I'm going to be late by half an hour. Would you be okay with me rescheduling, or do you really want it to start on time? Because I think I could do a better job with ABC. And so that's kind of a good example of react versus respond, and that happens in daily conversations. That happens in big strategic product decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, can I ask, Stephen, where you're getting your coaching certification from?
Coactive.
Coactive
good.
Training. Yeah, they're excellent. Just so you know, I went through ITech, and one of the things that we kind of talk about when respond or react is like whether, like, to me, what you're saying, like in terms of the personal triggers, is like when you're not necessarily conscious and like really thinking about what you want to do. Like oftentimes we do impulse reactions, right? And then respond is like you are kind of zooming out and you like see the big picture, and then you're able to select and choose like how you want to thoughtfully respond, like you shared. And so yeah, it's really cool to like hear different like coaching styles and like modalities and methodologies being in play. And like, I feel like when I read the book, I was like, this makes so much sense and everybody needs to read this, because I feel like coaching is just something, I don't know if you like went through it and thought like, I wish they taught us this in high school. Like life would be so much different or better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's really cool to like hear different styles and the way that it's taught, but the foundation is kind of like all the same. Is like a lot of it just starts with like the personal awareness of who we are and what we want, and then being conscious of others and playing around with that dynamic together so that we can create better relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like I say, one of the reasons why I picked the graphic novel format is because it's super accessible. And I absolutely totally agree with you. If I had the access to these tools in high school or even in university and college, I think like there's not a huge focus on that. It's getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. So like I wanted this format to be super accessible. Like I would love to teach a class at a university on this topic, because it's just so fundamental to succeeding in the workplace. And if you learn this in like on the job, that's good, but a person can be that much more successful coming in with the foundation.
Definitely. Can I ask you, because I was super impressed by like the whole book and especially like the graphics. I know you have an illustrator, but like where did you find the time to write this?
Oh yeah. Also, amazing illustrator, Dershing Helmer. She's incredibly talented. Definitely check her out and her work. Incredible. How I had time. It was a long 4-year process. So
wow.
Slowly chipping away at it. I have 2 kids too, so I was busy working with them. And it was a labor of love. Like I think I was really passionate about the comic format, so I work with some great people in that, and the artists and illustrators. So yeah, I'm just slowly chipping away. I'm working on another book right now, and I'm like, that I'm just like, you get a passion, you just end up finding the time to do it.
That's really wise. Like we all have the same amount of hours in a day, but like that's amazing that even with your full-time job, with the 2 little kiddos, you're still able to chisel away. And that's amazing that you look at it as like time and like a journey, but you're making time and space for the things that matter. And it's not like an overnight thing like we just talked about, but it's something that through your dedication and your focus, you have like a final tangible product, which is amazing to me. So I love that. I'm curious if you have a favorite quote.
Well, I will definitely answer your favorite quote question in a second, but just to go back to the idea of time allocation, I love with what you said too, because, and I usually use this sort of example with my team. As I say, if you have a 40-hour work week, you have 40 poker chips to, 40 poker chips in hour increments to play every week on where you want to spend your time. And really be thoughtful of where you're playing those poker chips. If this poker chip is specific for like a project or something that you want to do for yourself, or a team development thing, because over a course of the year, all those chips add up. And I think in the workplace, we were very gravitated towards the project work, which is essentially very important. But things like community, personal and team goals can be just as important. And so I always invite people to spend time in different places. So favorite quotes. It's a quote from the ex-CEO of Intuit, and I think it's really connected to the book in many ways, and his sort of overall way he describes the philosophy of an organization. He says, like, for a company big like Intuit or Google, is the shareholders, the people that support the business where the revenue comes from, is sort of like food. Without shareholders, the company would maybe last a couple weeks. And then he talks about customers, without customers of business, it's like water. So without water and these customers, your business maybe lasts 2 days. But he's like, employees are like air. And without air, the company dies in less than a couple minutes. And that hierarchy of like employee, customer, and shareholders, it makes sense, right? So focusing on the people in the organization, how we work together, how we come together, it's so core. It's the essence of a business, and only then can you build customers and then shareholders. And that's always really resonated with me. And that's why that's the core reason why I wrote the book. It's like, let's work on the most important element, which is people.
People, yeah, I love that analogy. Both analogies that you just shared in the quote. That's awesome. So Stephen, thank you so much again for sharing your journey with us and writing the book. Can you tell, or do you have anything that you want to add? Any final closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think I said this before, but I'll definitely say it again. Is just to practice, be patient. We're all human, so everyone's going to have bad days. That includes yourself, your boss, people on your team. And so, take a moment, take the pause, come back the next day and just do some inquiry like, hey, yesterday I felt maybe something wasn't quite right between the two of us. Like, is everything okay? And you might find out the most interesting things that'll help you make better decisions, which will typically help you, grow in your career and advance it. It's all about relationships for sure.
Yeah. I love that. And the biggest thing too is not to like jump to conclusions, because we never know what's happening on another person's thought patterns or what's going on in their lives. But we won't know until we ask. So
absolutely.
So Stephen, where can people find your book, which I have here?
Yeah, thank you. You can get it on Amazon. If you don't want to buy it through Amazon, you can buy it through Gumroads. You can go to my website, stephengay.com or whyalwayswins.com. It's digital and print versions. So yeah, choices.
Amazing. I want to just tell everybody to get the print version because it's like so cool that it's like comic style. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know it'll be that way on the digital too, but it's like a comic book that you get to hold.
Absolutely. Print's really good for comics.
Yeah. So I'll definitely link it down in the book, in the description box down below. I feel that, well, let me just ask, because I feel like everybody should read it, but like, who is it really written for? Like, what kind of person should pick this up?
Yeah, I think it's super accessible. So, don't be afraid of investing a huge chunk of time reading a book. So it's accessible to all. I think it's, if you're early in your career and you're looking for a boost, you're in college, university, or entering into the workforce, it is an essential, I would say. If you're a manager who wants to use it as a tool to facilitate a great conversation with your team, this is a great tool. It's super, it has a low barrier to have the conversation about some of these fundamentals. versus asking someone to read a 500-page business book. And it's fun. So it makes for a good gift. It makes for a good team offsite or workshop. So yeah, managers and/or people coming into the workforce. Yeah.
I love that. Like, I'm thinking back in my corporate career, I would have loved to just put one on my boss's desk. But I like that idea of like even just suggesting it as like a team. A team can all read this together. Like, again, you could read it in less than an hour, but then coming together and discussing the book or like practicing it. I'm curious now if you're going to conduct workshops. Like, is that part of the plan?
I've done a couple workshops already, so I do workshops. Again, we're all flexing. That's another topic in the book, and so with COVID, it's a little bit more difficult. But I've definitely done some online, Zoom-friendly presentations and workshops. So absolutely, it's you can do it that way as well. Yeah.
Cool. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I so appreciate you. And I'm just really excited to share your book and your journey because it's, I just really loved it. So I appreciate you so much. And I hope you have a really great day.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was wonderful chatting.